In 2012, Ubisoft struck gold with Far Cry 3. It sold at least 10 million units, had a Metacritic score of 90, and was one of 2012's most talked about games. In some ways, Far Cry 3 was a downgrade from Far Cry 2's still impressive sandbox, but the structure that 3 added did have its benefits. While I now look back on it as the origin point for a lot of the stale, open-world games we get now, I enjoyed Far Cry 3 quite a bit when it came out. What I didn't enjoy was the follow-up that came 2 years after. Ubisoft was trying so hard to replicate the success of 3 that they made a game that felt more like an expansion pack than it did a sequel. Pagan Min was a cheap Voss clone, the gameplay was not altered or added onto in any meaningful way, and it just lacked the personality that made me want to see 3 all the way through. After that came the filler game, Far Cry Primal. I got that game because I wanted to review it, but much like Metal Gear Survive, it was so miserable that I couldn't get more than halfway through it. Primal stripped the modern Far Cry formula down to its worst and most repetitive elements and had you tackle them with a stick and some stones. 2 years and a month-long delay later, we have Far Cry 5, a game that is, on the surface, quite different from what has come before. While previous entries have featured American protagonists being thrust into exotic locales, this time around, the game takes place in America. This fresh, yet familiar setting is Far Cry 5's greatest asset. The map is physically huge, but it also feels huge. There's massive mountains, dense forests, and winding country roads. The only disappointment was the lack of a dense town to provide some contrast to the openness of the map. Fall's End is the closest thing to that, but it's so hilariously small that it doesn't even come close to providing that. This setting brings with it a premise that is also quite different from 3 and 4. There's no pirates or warlords, instead it's all about a cult named Eden's Gate. The founder, Joseph Seed, believes himself to be chosen by God to prepare humanity for what he calls the collapse. He and his cult gain so much traction that they go on to occupy a substantial amount of Hope County, Montana, the fictional location that the game is set in. Due to the militaristic nature of Eden's Gate, the inhabitants of Hope County find themselves in a violent conflict with the cult. That's where the player character, a nameless rookie deputy, comes in. You, a sheriff, and a US Marshal are sent in to arrest Joseph Seed. This goes horribly wrong, your allies are captured and spread evenly across the map, and after that point, you're let loose in the world. Another key difference is that Joseph Seed is not the only prominent protagonist in the game, and despite ostensibly being the main character, he gets the least development out of the bunch. Instead, it's his 3 siblings that have a more direct relationship with the player character. This is where the freshness ends and the problems begin. The map is split into 3 areas, each of them ruled by one of these siblings. Because of this, the story missions are not linear. You're allowed to go through each of the 3 areas in any order you desire. Each one of the 3 regions plays out exactly the same. Help the allies at the mission hub, and then liberate the outposts, complete side missions, and destroy cult property. Instead of having the story missions directly accessible, these actions add points to a progress bar for liberating that entire region. Once the progress bar has reached certain milestones, the leader of that region will send out elite cultists to trap you, which is another problem altogether, because it rips you out of whatever you were doing whether you like it or not. A serious problem for a game all about player freedom, but let's not get ahead of ourselves since that's more of a gameplay issue. This is how all of the story missions begin, and they always end with the player finding a way to escape. This means that there aren't many story missions, and matters are made worse by how unbelievably short they are. If there were the same amount of missions but just one antagonist and a traditional linear structure, it might not have been so bad, but because each of the area's missions are about a different person and they don't build on top of one another, it's as if there's barely any story content at all. And this is all without mentioning the repetitive way in which the missions play out. Jacob Seed, for example, his missions involve doing the exact same time trial each time he captures you. It makes sense narratively since he's brainwashing you, but it takes up so much of that area's story that you barely spend any time with him. The sister, Faith, isn't much better. She does have more screen time than Jacob, but her main purpose is to provide the obligatory Far Cry LSD sequences. This leaves John, who is easily the best of the 3, but that's not saying much. He has the most direct interactions with the player, but even then, I never understood what role he was supposed to fill. Jacob was the survivalist guy with the military background, Faith was forced to join the family by Joseph, and John is the guy that says yes, but also etches words into people's skin, and kidnaps them to make them stronger, just like John was.
It's the power of yes! The power to take away your sins! The power to set you free.
Speaking of kidnappings, the story constantly uses the player character's fellow officers as plot devices, which falls short every time because I don't know these people. I was with them for 2 minutes before the game started. The problem could have been avoided by having the player character's dialogue flesh out those relationships that don't happen on the screen, but for whatever reason, Far Cry 5 features a silent protagonist, a decision that I think had a hugely negative impact. But what really pushed me over the edge in regards to the story content was how each of the area's stories concluded. The end mission of each region finds a way to put you into a cult-controlled bunker, which you then proceed to self-destruct and run from. It's the same thing every time, right down to the end cutscene of the bunker blowing up. Just like Jacob's time trials, the bunkers make sense considering the ending of the game, but that doesn't change how unsatisfying it is to have the climactic missions essentially be the same mission 3 times. The story missions and characters are weak at best, and definitely worse than what 3 and arguably 4 had on offer. But these games are supposed to be about the open world, so how's that? Well, it's quite weak if you ask me. As I mentioned, the map is massive, but you have to go so far before you find anything worthwhile, and when you do, it's like it's over before it's even started. The outposts, which are supposed to be the biggest chunk of the open world content, stood out to me as being poorly designed and incredibly short. Seemingly compensating for this, there are a lot of outposts on the map, but I'd much rather have half the amount at a higher level of quality. Most of the other side activities I tried weren't even worth the effort. A handful of the side missions have real characters, but most of them are find these 3 items that are 10 feet away, place them here, end mission. Finally, we end with something that I did not anticipate having to discuss: glitches. They range from stupid stuff like vehicles randomly despawning and dialogue constantly stepping all over itself, to more severe issues like bases that can't be liberated because the last guy is stuck in a tree half a mile away. It's been years since I played 3 and 4, but unless I'm crazy, I don't remember them having this many issues. Nothing puts a damper on seizing a stronghold like being forced to search 3 minutes for the last 2 guys that are glitched out, sitting in a helicopter.
Gotta say, things are better thanks to you.
The core mechanics in Far Cry 5 are the same as they were back in 2012 in Far Cry 3. Far Cry 4 was on last-gen consoles, so this is the first numbered Far Cry game exclusively on 8th-gen platforms. This should have been the game that finally added back some of the destruction that was possible in Far Cry 2, something that would have added much-needed variety to the sandbox. Instead, Far Cry 5 constantly takes the easy way out, from its short story missions to its lazy narrative explanation for why people join the cult. I'm feeling a 4 out of 10 on Far Cry 5. I think it's a decidedly below average game. But that's just what I think, and I'm clearly in the minority here. Far Cry 5 is doing extremely well, both in terms of sales and reception. So if you guys played it, let me know down below if you're content with the way things are in this franchise, or if you'd like to see things shaken up a little bit. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Do that again now.